My mother-in-law called my 12-year-old the idiot child for 3 years. The 8-minute compilation I played ended everything. It was the only thing I had left to do. There was no other option. Ruth had pushed me to the edge, and with one press of a button, I knew I'd bring it all crashing down. I wasn't sure if I was more angry or relieved. Maybe both. I still remember the first time she said it. The idiot child. It was Ruth's usual cutting tone, as she stood there in her kitchen, a cup of coffee in one hand, a smirk on her face. Jenny, my daughter, was trying to help. She was only 12, too young to understand the depth of Ruth's cruelty. But she tried. God, she tried so hard. She made a scrapbook full of old family photos. Handwritten notes about everyone's favorite memories, and little decorations she'd cut out herself. Jenny thought it would mean something to Ruth. But Ruth made it clear it meant nothing. When Jenny handed her the scrapbook, Ruth barely glanced at it before tossing it aside, like it was a piece of garbage. "This is what you got me." Ruth sneered, her voice sharp, like it was a personal insult to her intelligence. Jenny stood there, speechless, her face turning red. Ruth held up a shiny, expensive jewelry box from one of her real grandchildren and said, "Now this is a real present from a real grandchild with a functioning brain." My heart broke in that moment. Jenny had spent weeks on that thing, weeks of late nights, crafting it with love and care, and Ruth dismissed it in front of the entire family, like it was worthless. But Jenny didn't cry. Not then. She smiled and thanked her, like she always did, even though I knew she was crushed. That was Ruth's power. She made you feel worthless without a single care. I should have stood up for Jenny. I should have screamed at Ruth, demanded she apologize. But I didn't. I didn't because I was too scared of the consequences. Ruth had this way of making everything about her. And when you tried to call her out, you were the problem. Not her. Colin, my husband, always said she didn't mean it, she was just old school, from a different generation. He didn't understand. He never did. It was easier for him to ignore the hurt, to pretend it wasn't happening. But it wasn't easy for Jenny. It wasn't easy for me. Ruth's treatment of Jenny didn't stop there. It escalated. It was always little things at first. Forgetting to set a place for Jenny at family dinners. Giving her dollar store toys, while she showered her biological grandkids with the best gifts money could buy. But the worst part was the words. Ruth would say, "You should be grateful for anything. You're lucky Colin even lets you live in his house." Her words were poison, every one of them. And I let it happen. I told myself I couldn't make waves. I told myself I had to keep the peace for Jenny's sake. But I was wrong. Then came the Thanksgiving incident. Jenny had been working on a school project. She was so proud of it, so excited to share it with the family. But Ruth, in front of everyone, told her, "Maybe you should eat in the kitchen with the little kids where you belong." I had to do something. When I confronted Colin, he just shrugged it off. "She's from a different generation, honey." She didn't mean it. Give her time to adjust. Time to adjust. It had been 3 years. I was done waiting. Done letting Ruth tear my family apart with her cruelty. I wasn't going to be the silent, passive husband anymore. I wasn't going to sit back while Jenny suffered. Ruth didn't deserve to be in our lives anymore. So, I gathered everything I could: emails, recordings, witness statements. Ruth had done the same thing to Lindsay's nephew when they were fostering him. Ruth had made him feel like trash, like he wasn't worth anything, just because he wasn't blood. It was the same story, over and over again. Lindsay had everything documented. Emails, recordings, letters Ruth had written, admitting to driving her foster nephew away. Ruth had even told Lindsay she was fertile trash, unworthy of Colin. She'd called their child damaged goods. I wasn't just going to confront Ruth. I was going to expose her. Ruth's true nature would be revealed to everyone. And I wasn't going to let Colin's silence shield her anymore. It all came down to that Christmas party. That was when I'd do it. I'd had enough. I was going to press play on that 8-minute compilation of Ruth's greatest hits. The days leading up to the Christmas party were like walking on a tightrope, each moment a delicate balance between silence and eruption. I kept replaying that night in my head, the confrontation, the moment Ruth's cruelty would be exposed for everyone to see. The 8-minute video had become my weapon. My proof. I could already imagine her face when she saw it, the shock, the rage, the disbelief. It was going to be the end of it all. No more hiding. No more excuses. Ruth would finally be outed for who she truly was. But in the meantime, I was still living with the constant tension. Every family gathering felt like a battlefield. I'd watch Jenny try to smile, to pretend everything was okay, even as Ruth's cruel words lingered in the air. She was so damn strong, stronger than I had been, at least. She would sit there, absorbing the insults, the subtle slights, and still try to connect. She'd say thank you for the cheap, dollar store gifts Ruth gave her, when I knew damn well she deserved so much more than that. I had stopped being the quiet observer. It was impossible not to see the damage Ruth was doing. But the real wake-up call came one night when Jenny came home from a family dinner and collapsed into my arms, tears running down her face. She hadn't said a word, just clung to me like I was her only lifeline. She didn't have to say it, her silence spoke volumes. Ruth had ripped her apart again. And Colin. Well, he was still in his world of denial. He still tried to make excuses for his mother, still pretended like everything was just fine. I had confronted him so many times, but he refused to see it. Every time I raised my voice about Ruth's treatment of Jenny, he'd tell me I was overreacting. She's from a different generation, he'd say. You need to give her time. But that was the problem, wasn't it? Time had already passed, and nothing changed. Ruth's words were poison, slowly killing the bond between her and Jenny, and Colin just didn't care enough to stop it. Or maybe he didn't have the strength. Either way, I wasn't going to wait around for him to figure it out. That's when I started to dig. I wasn't just gathering my own thoughts anymore. I reached out to Lindsay. We had been talking more, sharing stories of the past, the way Ruth had torn into her and her nephew. Lindsay didn't hesitate to help. She had the recordings, proof of everything. Proof that Ruth had done this before, that she had systematically broken down children who weren't her own. It wasn't just Jenny. Ruth had ruined lives for years, and it wasn't just confined to Jenny. Lindsay had her own story. She'd kept the evidence hidden for so long, but she was done being silent. I sat with Lindsay one evening, her fingers flipping through the folder of old emails, voice memos, and even a letter Ruth had written to Colin. The letter was almost chilling. Ruth's words were sharp, deliberate. She admitted she had tried to drive away the foster child because he wasn't blood, and that was unforgivable in her eyes. She called him damaged goods, made him feel worthless. And when I saw it, all I could think was, this is the woman we're dealing with. This is the monster in our family. I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I was done letting Ruth poison my daughter's life. She was going to face the consequences of her actions. I spent the next few days gathering everything: emails, recordings, statements from Janet, from Amy, from anyone who had seen Ruth's cruelty firsthand. It was time to make sure Ruth understood what it felt like to be exposed, to be vulnerable, to be seen for what she truly was. Christmas Eve arrived. The air was thick with tension. Jenny was nervous, but she wouldn't admit it. She kept asking if I was sure about the plan. Are you really going to do it, Dad? She asked me, her eyes searching mine for reassurance. I'm sure, I told her. It's time. As we walked into the party, I could already feel the weight of the moment. Ruth was there, sitting at the head of the table, playing the part of the perfect grandmother. She smiled as she greeted everyone, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. Colin was standing beside her, as usual, giving her that knowing look. But I didn't care about that anymore. This wasn't about Colin. This was about Jenny. About finally giving her the justice she deserved. I found the AV system, connected my phone, and hit play. The first clip started, Ruth's voice filled the room. She's an idiot. The idiot child. She's nothing. I watched Ruth's face change, her smile faltering as the words she'd said so many times to Jenny were played out loud for everyone to hear. And as the clips continued, I saw the shock spread across the room, the gasps, the whispers. Everyone was listening now. Everyone was hearing the truth. By the time the video ended, the room was silent. Not a single word. It felt like time had frozen. I turned to Ruth. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, searching for something, anything, to say. But there was nothing, no excuses, no words that could take it back. The damage was done. Then, Lindsay walked in. She wasn't just a witness. She was the nail in Ruth's coffin. She walked straight up to the front of the room, her phone in hand, and she held it up. "I have the original recordings," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "Everything you just heard is real. Every word is true." I watched Ruth shrink, the room turning on her. It was over. Finally, after years of abuse, after watching Jenny suffer in silence, Ruth was exposed for the monster she was. But it wasn't over yet. Not for Jenny. Not for me. The confrontation had just begun. The silence that followed the video was suffocating. It wasn't just Ruth who was stunned, it was everyone. I could feel the eyes of the entire room on me, on Jenny, but Ruth's face was the only one that mattered. She looked like she had been struck, her usual air of superiority replaced with a kind of confusion, as if the world she had built had just crumbled around her. I couldn't look away. I couldn't stop myself from watching her unravel in front of everyone. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was choking on her own lies, the very ones she'd used to tear my family apart. But then came the denial. The defense. Ruth's instinct to manipulate kicked in, just as it always had. "These are fake," she spat, her voice shaking but laced with the venom I'd grown so accustomed to. "You've edited them, twisted everything. This is all lies." It was the same old Ruth. The same lies, the same manipulation. She couldn't accept the truth, couldn't accept that her actions had finally caught up with her. But then Lindsay spoke, her voice sharp and unwavering. "I have the originals," she said, holding up her phone for everyone to see. "I've kept them all. Full metadata, dates. You want to see the proof? Here it is." The room held its breath as Ruth's facade shattered. She tried to compose herself, but her shaky hands couldn't hide the fear that was creeping into her eyes. The power she once held over us, over me, was slipping away, and I felt a twisted satisfaction in watching it happen. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment Ruth would finally be exposed for what she truly was. Lindsay didn't back down. She continued, her words cutting through the room like a knife. "You've done this before, Ruth. It's not just Jenny. It's everyone. You've hurt so many people. My nephew, Janet, Amy, all of us. We have the evidence. We have the proof." I could see Ruth's face change. The anger was still there, but now it was tinged with something else. Something that looked like panic. She had always been in control. Always been the one who could manipulate the situation to her advantage. But now she was cornered, exposed in front of everyone, and there was nowhere left for her to hide. Colin, my husband, stood beside her, his face flushed with embarrassment. He looked at me, then at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. "This isn't what you think," he mumbled, his voice weak, trying to play it off like everything would just go away if he said the right words. But his words fell flat. They meant nothing now. Ruth turned to him, desperation creeping into her voice. "Colin, tell them this is all a lie. You know this isn't true," she pleaded, her face twisting in a way that made her look almost unrecognizable. But Colin was silent, completely silent. I watched him, this man I had loved for so many years, as he stood there, paralyzed. The years of him allowing Ruth's behavior to slide, his refusal to confront her, to see her for who she really was, were all laid bare in this moment. And it hurt. It hurt more than I ever could have imagined. Jenny stood beside me, her body tense, her hand gripping mine. She had been so strong, so brave, even through all the cruelty Ruth had thrown at her. But now, I could feel the weight of what she had been carrying for all these years. "Why didn't you protect me, Colin?" Jenny's voice was steady, but there was a rawness to it that broke my heart. She wasn't screaming, she wasn't crying. She was speaking the truth that had been ignored for far too long. Colin didn't answer. He just looked at her, his face pale, his eyes full of regret and guilt. But there was no comfort in his silence. There was no apology. Not yet. "I'm sorry," he finally whispered, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. I could see Jenny's face fall. She didn't believe him. And why should she? This wasn't just about words. It was about actions, and Colin had failed her. The room had gone quiet again, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Ruth's voice shattered the stillness once more, but this time it was different. She wasn't commanding the room anymore. She was pleading. "You're all against me," she said, her voice cracking. "I've done nothing wrong. I was just trying to protect my family. All of you are turning on me." Her words felt like a poison, like she was trying to manipulate the room again. But it wasn't working. No one believed her anymore. Not after everything that had come out. Not after the truth was exposed. And that was when I knew. I knew it was time. It was time for me to take the final step. I pulled out my phone and hit play again. The next recording filled the room, Ruth's voice ringing out, this time in private conversation with Colin. "Jenny's probably brain damaged from that broken home of hers," Ruth said coldly. "We need to get rid of them both before they contaminate the family. Colin, you've got to do something about this." I looked at Colin, watching his face drain of all color. The guilt, the shame, it was too much for him to hide now. The truth was there, right in front of him, and there was no denying it. His mother had called our daughter brain damaged. She had planned to drive us out of her life for good, and Colin said nothing. Jenny stepped forward, her voice strong, her eyes unwavering. "You let her say that about me. You sat there for years and did nothing. And now you want to say sorry. Sorry doesn't fix it, Colin. It doesn't fix 3 years of me feeling like I wasn't good enough for you, like I was just a burden in your life." Her words hit me like a wave, but I was proud of her. So proud. Jenny had found her voice, and she wasn't going to let anyone silence her anymore. Ruth's face twisted in fury as she realized the walls were closing in. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. As Jenny and I turned to leave, I heard Ruth scream after us, "You're destroying my family. You'll regret this. You'll all regret this." But I didn't care anymore. Ruth's family wasn't ours, and we were done with her. We walked out of that room. And for the first time in years, I felt like we were free. We left the party that night without a single word exchanged between Colin and me. Jenny didn't say anything either. She was too quiet, too numb from everything she had just witnessed. She had walked out of that room with her head held high, but I could see it in her eyes. The betrayal, the hurt, the confusion. She had been through so much already, and now, the man who should have protected her had just let her down in the worst possible way. I didn't know where to go from there. The damage felt irreversible. Ruth had been publicly exposed, her manipulative behavior laid bare for everyone to see, but Colin was still lost in his own mess. I knew he would be a mess of apologies, but that didn't change the fact that Jenny had to live the reality that he hadn't stood up for her when it mattered most. Back at home, I tried to comfort Jenny, but she was distant, locked inside herself. She went straight to her room, shut the door, and left me standing in the hallway. I knew this wasn't just about Ruth anymore. It was about her whole world, the one she had been trying to make sense of, trying to fit into. A family that kept telling her she wasn't enough. I sat down in the living room, staring at the empty space where Ruth's presence used to loom over us, and tried to process everything. The gravity of what had happened started to sink in. I had exposed Ruth for who she truly was. But nothing felt like a victory. Not yet. Then the phone rang. It was Lindsay. She wasn't calling to check on me. She was calling to talk about the next step. I have everything, she said, her voice steady and calm despite the chaos of the evening. I've got the emails, the recordings, and now we've got Ruth on tape admitting she's been trying to get rid of Jenny for years. It's over for her, Simon. We just need to keep going. I knew Lindsay was right. This wasn't just about making Ruth uncomfortable. It was about ending her reign of terror over our family. But how? How could we make sure that Ruth couldn't turn this all around and manipulate everyone again? The family was already divided, but Ruth was clever. She would fight back. Ruth's going to try and spin this, Lindsay. She's going to twist the story and make herself the victim. My voice cracked slightly as the weight of the situation hit me. I know, Lindsay said, her tone firm. That's why we need to be smart about this. You're not done yet. This isn't just a family issue anymore. It's bigger than that. You've got to get everything on record, everything. Ruth can't get away with this. I agreed. It wasn't enough to just expose Ruth at the party. We had to make sure everyone knew what kind of person she really was. Her cruelty wasn't just a moment of bad judgment. It was a pattern. I wasn't going to let her hide behind her manipulations any longer. The next few days were a blur of activity. I met with a lawyer, sat down with Lindsay, and began organizing the evidence. We had so much that Ruth had said in private, in emails, in phone calls, so much that she never thought would come back to bite her. But it was all there, recorded and documented. It wasn't just about Ruth anymore. It was about everyone who had been hurt by her. Amy, Janet, Lindsay, so many people who had been left in her wake, bruised and broken. They had their stories, too, and they weren't staying silent anymore. We were going to make sure Ruth didn't get to control the narrative this time. By the time the legal meeting was over, I was exhausted, emotionally drained. But I felt something I hadn't felt in years: power. Not the kind of power that came from manipulation or control, but real power. The kind that comes from doing the right thing, from standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. That night, Jenny came to me, her eyes red from crying. But there was something different in her gaze. Something stronger. She didn't say anything at first, just sat next to me on the couch and leaned into me. I don't feel stupid anymore, Dad, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't feel like I'm worthless. I looked at her, my heart breaking with pride. Jenny, you never were. She smiled softly, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. It wasn't over. Not yet. But I knew we had taken the first step toward healing. The next morning, Ruth called. I didn't pick up. I didn't need to hear what she had to say. I already knew. It was always the same. The manipulations, the lies, the desperate need for control. She would try to worm her way back into our lives, but she wouldn't succeed this time. That evening, as I sat with Jenny, watching her finally start to laugh again, genuine laughter, not forced or fake, I knew we were going to be okay. Ruth may have tried to break us, but she failed. Jenny was stronger now, and so was I. We weren't going to let her destroy us anymore. And Ruth. She would have to face the consequences of her actions, no matter how hard she fought to deny them. The battle wasn't over. But we were ready. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and moments of sheer disbelief. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. Ruth was still out there, still trying to control the narrative, still trying to twist everything in her favor. But it didn't matter. The 8-minute compilation had done its job. Ruth was no longer the untouchable matriarch of the family. Jenny and I spent the next few days in a kind of strange quiet. There were no family dinners, no gatherings, no pretending like everything was fine. It was just us, me trying to hold it together, Jenny trying to process everything. She was quieter than usual, but she wasn't withdrawing. Not like before. She was still my little girl, but I could see the shift in her. The shift in both of us, really. The morning after the party, Colin called. I stared at my phone for a few minutes before answering. I didn't think it would come to this, he said, his voice barely audible on the other end. I didn't think you'd go that far. You left me no choice, Colin, I said. My voice hard. You stood by while she tore our daughter apart. You did nothing. And now you want me to feel sorry for you. I never meant for any of this to happen, Colin mumbled. You don't understand, she's my mother. I don't know how to just cut her off. I heard his hesitation, the old excuses rising again. But this time, I didn't feel any sympathy for him, not anymore. Cut her off, I repeated. She called Jenny an idiot. She tried to destroy our family. And you're still making excuses for her. You couldn't even stand up for your daughter when it mattered most. I'm trying to fix it, Colin said. But there was no conviction in his words. I'm trying, okay? I wasn't sure I could believe him anymore. Trying wasn't enough. He should have been trying years ago. But now, it felt like too little, too late. I don't know if trying is enough anymore, I said. You need to make a choice, Colin. It's either your mother or it's us. I can't keep waiting for you to figure it out. There was silence on the other end of the line. And in that silence, I realized something. I didn't need Colin to fix it. Jenny and I would be fine without him, if it came to that. I'll talk to Jenny, Colin said finally, his voice faltering. I'll do whatever it takes. You've got a lot of work ahead of you, I said before hanging up. That evening, I found myself standing in the kitchen, watching Jenny as she pushed her food around on her plate, not really eating. She hadn't said much all day, but I could tell she was still processing everything, the confrontation, the recordings, the fallout. She was a quiet storm, and I had no idea what would happen once the storm broke. I'm okay, Dad, she said suddenly, her voice soft but steady. She wasn't looking at me, just staring down at her food. I'm okay, I'm just tired of it all. I nodded, not knowing what to say. I know, honey. I know. I don't want to be afraid of her anymore, Jenny added, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want her to control me. I don't want to feel like I'm not enough. You're more than enough, I told her, walking over to sit next to her at the table. You've always been enough. But it's not just about her, Jenny said, her eyes meeting mine for the first time all day. It's about you too. I blinked, unsure of where she was going with this. What do you mean? You didn't protect me, Dad, she said, the words heavy between us. You let her do that to me, and you didn't stop it. The sting of her words hit me harder than anything Ruth had ever said. I'd spent so long convincing myself I was doing the best I could, balancing the family, keeping the peace, but I hadn't protected her. Not in the way she needed. Not in the way she deserved. I'm sorry, Jenny, I whispered, my voice cracking. I should have done more. Her expression softened, but the hurt was still there. I don't need your apologies. I need you to fight for me, for us, not just let her walk all over us. I nodded, my chest tight. I will. I promise you, I will. And for the first time in a long time, I believed myself. Jenny and I were going to be okay. We had to be. The next day, Ruth tried to call again. This time, I didn't answer. I couldn't. I wasn't sure how much more of her manipulation I could take. It wasn't just the lies anymore. It was the years of emotional abuse. The ways she'd chipped away at us, making us question our worth. But I wasn't going to let her do it anymore. Lindsay called later that afternoon. She was the only one who seemed to understand what I was going through. I've been thinking about what you said, she said, her voice calm, steady, about Ruth and how we need to make sure she can't hurt anyone else. It's not just about what happened with Jenny. It's bigger than that. We need to expose Ruth for everything she's done. We can't let her get away with it. I agreed. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about family. It was about accountability. About making sure Ruth couldn't use her power and control to hurt anyone else. We'll make sure she can't get away with it. I promised. Not this time. And in that moment, I knew we were ready. Ruth had tried to tear us apart, but she hadn't won. We were done letting her control our lives. I was going to make sure she faced the consequences of her actions. For Jenny, for me, for everyone she'd ever hurt. It was time to end this, once and for all. I didn't know what to expect when I walked into the therapy office with Jenny. She was quiet as we sat down, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes, usually full of life, were now clouded with exhaustion. I could see the remnants of the emotional storm she'd been through. But she wasn't broken. Not anymore. I'd seen her fight, and I knew she was strong. But the damage was still there, raw and tender, like a wound that hadn't yet healed. The therapist, a woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and a gentle smile, introduced herself and asked Jenny how she was feeling. Jenny's response was a slow, reluctant murmur. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't really want to talk about it." The therapist nodded, giving Jenny space. I could see the patience in her eyes, like she was waiting for Jenny to come to her own conclusion, to speak when she was ready. But Jenny didn't speak. She just sat there, and for a moment, I felt that old, familiar panic rise in me. I hated seeing her so small, so quiet, like she was closing herself off again. Then, the therapist turned her attention to me. "Simon," she said softly, her voice warm but firm. "Tell me what you've been experiencing. Tell me what you're feeling. And what you see Jenny going through." It was like a switch had flipped. The words rushed out of me before I could stop them. All the frustration, the guilt, the anger at myself for not seeing what was happening sooner. Everything I'd buried came pouring out. "I've failed her," I said, my voice tight. "I failed my daughter. Ruth. Ruth has been tearing her down for years, and I just sat there. I just let it happen. I didn't do anything to stop it. I kept thinking it was going to get better. That Colin would step up, that things would change. But it never did. And now, she's been broken by it. She doesn't know who she is anymore. She doesn't know what she's worth." The therapist's eyes softened, and she leaned forward slightly. "That's a lot of guilt you're carrying, Simon. But you have to understand, it wasn't your fault. Ruth's behavior was out of your control. You didn't make her treat Jenny that way. You didn't choose to be passive. You were caught in a situation where you didn't know how to act." I nodded. But the weight of my failure felt like it was crushing me. But I didn't protect her. I should have done more. I should have done anything instead of standing there, letting Ruth poison her life. And now I don't know how to fix it. Jenny shifted in her seat, finally breaking her silence. Her voice was soft but clear, and there was a strength behind it that I hadn't heard in a long time. "It's not just you, Dad," she said. "It's me, too. I let her do it to me. I thought I could make it stop, you know. I tried. I kept saying thank you for the stupid presents, for the awful things she said, because I thought maybe if I tried hard enough, she'd like me. But she never did. She never will." I felt my chest tighten, my heart breaking for her all over again. But I couldn't let that silence us. I couldn't let her live in that fear of being unworthy any longer. "You are worthy," I said, my voice shaking. "You always have been, Jenny. I want you to know that. You didn't deserve any of it. Not from Ruth. Not from Colin. Not from anyone." She looked at me then, her eyes still a little too guarded, but something was softening behind them. She was hearing me. Really hearing me, for the first time in a long time. And maybe that was the first step toward healing. The therapist let the silence sit there for a moment before speaking. "This is important, Jenny. You don't need to earn people's love. And you don't need to apologize for being yourself. You deserve love, respect, and kindness no matter what anyone else has told you. No one has the right to make you feel small." Jenny nodded slowly, her lips trembling slightly as if she were fighting back tears. I could see the pain in her, but I could also see the shift. The walls she'd put up for so long were starting to come down. "We're going to work on building you back up, Jenny," the therapist said gently. "It's going to take time, but you've got people here who love you, who are going to help you every step of the way." Jenny didn't say anything at first. She just nodded, but I could see the relief in her posture, in the way her shoulders were no longer as tense. She was starting to believe it, starting to believe that she wasn't the problem. That maybe, just maybe, she was worthy of all the love and support I'd been promising her. And I couldn't help but think of Colin, how much he'd missed. How he'd never once stepped up, how he'd let Ruth's poison infect their lives for so long. And as much as I wanted to believe he could change, I knew the road ahead would be long and hard. For now, I couldn't trust him to be there for Jenny. I couldn't trust him to fix it. But Jenny was healing, slowly but surely. That night, as we drove home from therapy, I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Her face was calm. But there was something different about her. There was a strength I hadn't seen before. "I'm proud of you," I said quietly. She smiled faintly, her eyes softening. "I'm trying, Dad. I really am." And that's when I realized we were both trying. We were both going to get through this, no matter how long it took. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, I felt like we were moving forward. Jenny wasn't the idiot child anymore. She was my daughter, my warrior, and we were going to rebuild. Together. The days that followed felt like they stretched on forever. Jenny was still healing, still holding herself together, but the cracks were starting to show. She was opening up in therapy, and I could see the progress. But it was slow, painstakingly slow. And the weight of everything that had happened still hung in the air. I knew Jenny was trying. She was fighting through it. But I could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the fear of what came next. It was as if she was waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the next round of hurt. Because that's what Ruth had taught her to expect. That's what my silence had taught her to expect. But that wasn't going to be her future. Not anymore. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Ruth had tried to spin everything. The phone calls, the messages. Ruth was relentless. She wasn't going to just let this go. She couldn't. She'd spent her entire life controlling everyone around her, and now that control was slipping away, piece by piece. She wouldn't go down quietly. The first time I heard from her after the party, I didn't answer. The second time, I just let it ring. I didn't need her in my life anymore. I didn't need her toxic influence creeping into our home, poisoning everything we were working so hard to build. But that didn't stop her. By the time I received the letter, I had already heard the rumors. Ruth had started spinning her version of the story. She was calling me a manipulator, a liar, a gold digger who was using Jenny to tear apart her family. She claimed I had turned everyone against her. That I was poisoning the family against her because I was angry she wouldn't give me money or let me control everything. I felt a wave of rage hit me, but it wasn't just for myself. It was for Jenny. Ruth was still trying to destroy her, even now. Trying to make her believe she wasn't worthy of anything, even after everything she had done to us. I opened the letter and read it through once, twice, each word another stab of betrayal. Ruth's words were venomous, but what hit hardest was the last part. Jenny will regret this. She will wish she had never crossed me. You're both nothing without me. I'll make sure of it. The anger I had been holding in bubbled over. But this time, it wasn't just for me. It was for Jenny, for everything Ruth had done to her. I couldn't let her get away with it. I couldn't let her tear us apart anymore. I grabbed my phone and dialed Lindsay. I didn't even let it ring more than once before she picked up. "Lindsay, it's time," I said, my voice tight with barely contained fury. "We need to take action. Ruth can't be allowed to keep doing this." "I agree," she said, her voice steady. "I'll start making calls. We're going to make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug." I hung up and sat there, holding the letter in my hands, the weight of it threatening to suffocate me. But I couldn't sit here and let Ruth control me any longer. This was it. I was done with her. Over the next few days, we began the process of cutting Ruth off, completely. I filed for a restraining order. One that would keep her away from Jenny, from me, from our home. Ruth wasn't going to have any more access to our lives. I wasn't going to let her manipulate Jenny anymore. Colin didn't take it well. "I can't believe you're doing this," he said, his voice strained with frustration. You're just making things worse. This isn't the way to fix things, Simon. Fix things. I repeated, incredulous. You didn't do a damn thing to fix it. You let her destroy our daughter, Colin. You didn't protect her. You let Ruth poison everything. I'm trying to fix it, Colin muttered, but I could hear the hesitation in his voice, the lack of conviction. I didn't know how. You didn't know how. I shot back. You've known for years. You just didn't want to deal with it. Colin looked down at his feet, unable to meet my gaze. I'm sorry, okay. I know I failed Jenny. But this, what you're doing, it's not the way to fix things. It's the only way, I said, my voice cold. She's never going to stop. She's never going to leave us alone. You don't get it, Colin. This is the only way to make sure she can't hurt Jenny anymore. The silence between us was heavy, but it didn't matter. Ruth was gone from our lives. We were done with her, and there was nothing Colin could say to change that. In the weeks that followed, Jenny's healing began to speed up. She was still cautious, still carrying the weight of everything Ruth had done to her. But there was something different about her now. She wasn't scared anymore. She wasn't afraid of Ruth's words, of her threats. Jenny had started to see herself for who she really was, not some broken child, not some idiot to be tossed aside, but a strong, capable young woman who deserved better. And that, more than anything else, was what Ruth had never understood. She thought she could break Jenny, make her feel small, worthless. But Jenny was stronger than Ruth ever realized. She was stronger than I had ever realized. I watched Jenny one night as she sat at the kitchen table, her face illuminated by the soft light of her laptop. She was researching college programs, looking at scholarships, talking about her future as though nothing could stop her. I'm thinking about marine biology, she said, her voice full of purpose. Maybe work at an aquarium. I could study marine animals and teach people about them. I smiled at her, a proud ache in my chest. That sounds amazing, Jenny. You'll do great. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. Jenny was moving forward. She was reclaiming her future, building a life where Ruth had no power, no control. And as for Ruth, she was trying to manipulate everyone around her, but her lies were no longer believed. The walls were closing in on her. The people she had hurt, the ones she'd turned away, were standing up for each other, speaking out against her cruelty. She was losing her grip, and nothing she did could stop it. Jenny and I were finally free. The weeks passed, each one seeming to drag on while simultaneously rushing by, until finally, Jenny came to me one afternoon with something I hadn't expected. She was standing in the doorway, her face unreadable, holding a piece of paper in her hands. It looked like she had been carrying it around for a while, maybe working up the courage to hand it to me. I want you to read this, she said, her voice steady but nervous. She handed me the paper, her fingers trembling slightly. It's a letter. From Colin. I took the letter from her hand, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. I hadn't spoken to Colin much since everything had fallen apart, since Ruth's expose at the Christmas party. He'd been distant, trying to navigate the wreckage of his relationship with his mother, but more importantly, his broken relationship with Jenny. I opened the letter, my heart pounding. His handwriting was neat, but there was an urgency to the words, as though he knew this was his last chance to make things right. Jenny, I know, I've failed you. I know the damage I've done, the hurt I've caused by standing by and doing nothing, while Ruth treated you like you were less than. I wish I could go back and fix it, but I can't. What I can do is be here for you now. I've learned, and I'm sorry it took me so long to realize it. I will never make the same mistake again. I will protect you always, and I will be the father you deserve. I don't expect forgiveness right now. I don't even deserve it. But I hope one day, you'll see that I'm trying to be better, to make up for the years of silence. I love you, Jenny, and I am sorry. Colin. I folded the letter slowly, my hands shaking as I processed the words. I could feel the weight of everything in that letter. the pain, the regret, the genuine attempt to fix what he had broken. But as I sat there, looking at Jenny, I couldn't help but wonder if it was enough. Was it enough for her to forgive him? For her to believe that he had really changed? Jenny stood there, waiting, her eyes flicking from the letter to my face. She was giving me the space to process, but I could feel the tension in the room, the uncertainty of what this meant. "I don't know if I can forgive him, Dad," she said softly, her voice wavering just a little. "I don't know if I can just forget everything he did, but he's trying, and maybe that's enough. I don't know." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Forgiveness wasn't something that could be rushed. It wasn't something anyone could force. It was a choice, and Jenny had to make it on her own time, on her own terms. But I could see the flicker of something in her eyes, a willingness to heal, to give him a chance. That was all I could ask for. "You don't have to forgive him today, Jenny," I said gently. "You don't have to make any decisions right now. What matters is that you're healing. You're stronger now, and you get to decide what's right for you." She nodded, looking at the letter again, her eyes scanning the words as if weighing them one final time. Then, she tucked it into her bag and gave me a small smile. "I'll think about it, Dad. I need time." I squeezed her hand, offering her all the reassurance I could muster. "Take all the time you need, sweetheart. No one is rushing you. I'm just glad you're here with me. We'll get through this together, whatever happens." Later that evening, after Jenny had gone to bed, I found myself sitting alone in the kitchen, reflecting on everything that had happened over the last few months. Ruth's cruelty had been the catalyst for everything: her words, her actions, the way she had torn our family apart. But in the aftermath, something had shifted. Something had changed in Jenny, in me. I had watched my daughter become someone stronger, someone who no longer accepted being put down or made to feel less than. I had watched her find her voice, even when the person who should have been protecting her had failed her. And that was something I would never take for granted again. The phone rang, breaking the silence. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. It was Colin. "Simon, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing," he said, his voice wary. "I know I've messed up, and I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I'm asking, could you please give me another chance? I can't fix the past, but I want to try and fix this." I exhaled slowly, the weight of the decision heavy in my chest. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe he could change. But I had to look at Jenny first. I had to see where she was at. "I'll talk to Jenny," I said, my voice calm but firm. "She's the one who needs to decide if she's ready. I can't make that decision for her." "I understand," Colin replied quietly. "Thank you, Simon. I'll wait for her to be ready. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry for everything." I hung up the phone, feeling a strange sense of closure. Colin was finally facing the truth, finally understanding the depth of his failure. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step in fixing what had been broken. The next morning, Jenny and I sat down together for breakfast. It was quiet, the kind of silence that wasn't filled with tension, but with something more hopeful. Like the calm before the storm. Jenny didn't bring up the letter, but I could tell she was still processing. Still figuring out what forgiveness meant for her, what the future looked like. But as I watched her, I saw a glimmer of the girl I'd lost, the one who had been buried under Ruth's cruelty, the one who had been afraid to take up space. Jenny was learning to stand tall again. And that was the most important thing. "Dad," Jenny said suddenly, breaking the silence, "I've been thinking about my last name. I want to keep it." I looked at her, unsure of where she was going. "You mean your last name?" She nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Yeah, I've decided. It's mine. It's part of me, part of my story. And it's not just about Colin or Ruth. It's about everything that's happened. About the family I've made. So, I want to keep it." My heart swelled with pride. Jenny had made her choice. She wasn't going to let anyone define her, Not Ruth, not even Colin. She was forging her own path, one step at a time. "You've got it," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You're exactly who you're meant to be." We spent the rest of the day together, just the two of us, enjoying the calm that had settled over our lives. Jenny was still uncertain about Colin, and that was okay. But what mattered most was that she had the strength to make her own choices, to reclaim her life from the people who had tried to take it from her. And me. I had made my peace too. I had stood up for my daughter, had done the right thing, even when it was hard. I didn't know what the future would hold for Jenny and Colin, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened, I would always be here for her. As we sat down for dinner that evening, Jenny looked at me, a quiet confidence in her eyes. "I'm going to be okay, Dad," she said, her voice steady. I smiled, knowing in my heart that she was right. "I know, kiddo. I know."